Imagine a map, not a clean digital map on your phone, a hand-drawn map on cracked parchment, stained with salt water and rum. The kind of map where the ink bleeds at the edges and the coastlines look like they were scratched in by a man who hadn't slept in 3 days. Now, zoom out. You're looking at the Caribbean. Sometime around 1715, the camera pulls wide over the Atlantic, and you can see the trade routes. Hundreds of them, thick golden lines running from the ports of Havana, Port Royal, Nassau, Cartagena, stretching all the way across the ocean to London, Lisbon, Seville. These lines represent money: sugar from the plantations of Jamaica and Barbados, tobacco from the Virginia colony, rum from the distilleries of New England, gold and silver hauled out of the mines of Peru and Mexico on the backs of enslaved indigenous workers, cotton, indigo, spices, mahogany. The entire economy of the Western world floating across open water on wooden ships with nothing but wind and prayer keeping them on course. Every one of those golden lines was a vein, and the empires of Europe were bleeding the New World dry through every single one of them. And scattered across that map, like ink splattered from a broken quill, are red dots. Dozens of them. Hundreds, if you widen the time frame. Each one marks a pirate attack. Some of these dots are clustered so tightly around the Bahamas, around Nassau in particular, that the islands almost disappear beneath them. Nassau, the pirate republic, the one port in the Western Hemisphere where pirates could dock openly, sell stolen cargo in broad daylight, and drink themselves blind without fear of arrest. Other dots trail down the African coast, around the Cape of Good Hope, into the Indian Ocean, following the treasure-laden ships of the Mughal Empire. Now picture this. Every single one of those red dots, every burning merchant vessel, every terrified crew surrendering without a fight, every stolen cargo hold emptied at gunpoint. Almost all of them happened under the same symbol, a flag, a black flag with white bones on it, the Jolly Roger. But here's what nobody tells you about that flag. It wasn't just a flag. It was the single most effective psychological weapon in the history of naval warfare. More effective than cannons, more effective than broadsides, more effective than any warship the Royal Navy ever built. And the story of how it came to exist, how it evolved, and why it worked so terrifyingly well is far stranger and far more calculated than any pirate movie has ever shown you. To understand the Jolly Roger, you have to understand what came before it. And what came before it was red. Before we go any further, I need to stop for a second, because what I've been showing you in these videos only scratches the surface. And I realized at some point that the full picture, the actual pirate code, word for word, the real punishment records, the exact treasure division shares, the ports that secretly funded them, it doesn't fit in a video. I put it all into one document, the Black Flag Codex. It's linked below, and the QR code is on your screen. Now, let's keep going. In the early days of maritime conflict, long before the golden age of piracy, ships that intended to show no mercy flew a plain red flag. This was not a pirate invention. This was standard naval practice. A red flag, sometimes called the bloody flag, meant one thing and one thing only: surrender now, or everyone on board dies. No quarter, no prisoners, no negotiation. The French had a term for this flag. They called it the Joli Rouge, the pretty red. And there's a theory, one that historians have debated for centuries, that Joli Rouge eventually got mangled by English-speaking sailors into something that sounded close but meant nothing in French: Jolly Roger. Now, that's one theory. There's another that traces the name to Old Roger, which was a common English slang term for the devil himself. And if you think about what those early pirate flags looked like, that connection makes perfect sense. Skulls, bones, hourglasses, devils with pitchforks, bleeding hearts. These weren't random decorations. They were symbols of death, time running out, and damnation. Old Roger's calling card. There's even a third theory that connects the name to a specific pirate, though this one is shakier. Some historians have pointed to Ali Raja, a title used by certain Muslim pirates operating in the Indian Ocean. English sailors encountering these raiders might have corrupted Ali Raja into something more familiar to their ears. But this theory has fewer defenders than the other two, and for good reason. The timing doesn't quite line up. Whatever the true origin of the name, the important thing is what the flag represented. And to understand that, you need to understand the problem pirates were trying to solve. Here's the situation. You're a pirate captain in 1716. You've got a crew of maybe 60 to 80 men. Your ship is fast but not particularly well armed. You've got maybe 12 cannons, half of which are unreliable. Your crew is experienced, sure, but they're also malnourished, probably drunk, and definitely not interested in dying today. Now you spot a merchant ship on the horizon. That ship is carrying sugar from Jamaica, or tobacco from Virginia, or silver from the Spanish Main. That cargo is worth a fortune. But here's the problem. If you have to fight for it, you might win, but you'll lose men. You'll damage your ship. You might damage the cargo. And every man you lose is a man you can't replace easily, because it's not like you can post a job listing at the nearest port without getting hanged. So the ideal scenario is this. You want the merchant ship to surrender without a fight. You want them to see you coming, panic, and give up immediately. You want the fight to be over before it starts. That's what the Jolly Roger was designed to do. Think about it from the merchant captain's perspective. You're sailing a cargo vessel. Your crew is maybe 20 men, most of whom signed up for steady pay and 3 meals a day, not combat. You have a few cannons, but your men barely know how to fire them. You're carrying goods that belong to a wealthy trading company back in London or Amsterdam. Those goods are insured. You, however, are not. Now, a ship appears on the horizon, moving fast. At first, you tell yourself it's another merchant vessel. Maybe a Royal Navy patrol. Maybe a friendly Dutch trader heading the same direction. You watch it for 10 minutes, maybe 20, and the knot in your stomach tightens because that ship is not passing. It's turning. It's adjusting course. It's heading directly for you, and it's gaining. Your first mate calls out from the rigging. He can see the flag now, a black flag with a skull and crossed bones. The blood drains from your face. You know exactly what that flag means. It means there are somewhere between 50 and 200 armed men on that ship who have nothing to lose. It means they've done this before, probably dozens of times. It means that if you fight and lose, and you will almost certainly lose, they might kill everyone on board. But if you surrender peacefully, hand over the cargo, maybe some supplies and weapons, there's a very good chance they'll let you and your crew go unharmed. So, what do? You surrender. Of course you surrender. The cargo isn't yours. Your life is. And that's exactly what happened, over and over and over again, throughout the golden age of piracy. Estimates suggest that the vast majority of pirate attacks during this period ended without significant violence. Not because pirates were peaceful. They absolutely were not. But because the flag did the fighting for them. The Jolly Roger was, in modern terms, a brand. A brand that communicated a very specific message. We are pirates. We are dangerous. But we are also reasonable. Surrender and live. Fight and die. And like any good brand, it evolved. Because contrary to what every Halloween costume would have you believe, there was no single Jolly Roger. There was no standard design that every pirate used. The skull and crossbones that we all recognize today, the one on Halloween costumes and rum bottles and theme park rides, that's a simplification. In reality, every major pirate captain flew their own version, and each version told a different story. Take Blackbeard, Edward Teach, or Thatch, depending on which historical record you trust. The most famous pirate who ever lived. His flag showed a skeleton holding an hourglass in one hand and a spear in the other, piercing a bleeding heart. That hourglass wasn't decorative. It was a message. Your time is running out. Surrender now or die. The bleeding heart was even more direct. This is what happens to you if you don't. Blackbeard himself was a master of psychological theater beyond just his flag. Before battle, he would tuck slow-burning hemp cord, soaked in saltpeter, under his hat and light it. His face would be wreathed in thick smoke, his eyes glowing through the haze like a demon climbing up from the deck of a burning ship. He wore 6 pistols strapped across his chest. He carried multiple cutlasses. He looked like death walking, and combined with that flag flying above him, the effect was devastating. Entire crews would surrender the moment they recognized what they were looking at. Blackbeard understood something that modern marketers spend millions trying to figure out. Specificity sells fear. A generic skull and crossbones says, "We're pirates." A skeleton stabbing a heart while holding an hourglass says, "We are going to kill you slowly," and the clock is already ticking. Combine that with a captain whose face is literally on fire, and you have a brand so terrifying that it functioned as a weapon all on its own. That's a different level of psychological pressure entirely. Then there was Bartholomew Roberts, known to history as Black Bart, the most successful pirate of the Golden Age by sheer numbers. Roberts captured over 400 ships in his career, a record that no other pirate even came close to matching. His flag was perhaps the most personal of them all. It showed Roberts himself, standing on 2 skulls. Beneath those skulls were the letters ABH and AMH. Those letters stood for a Barbadian's head and a Martinican's head. This wasn't abstract symbolism. This was a direct threat against the governors of Barbados and Martinique, both of whom had sent warships to hunt Roberts down. Think about that for a moment. Roberts was so confident, so utterly unbothered by the authorities trying to capture him, that he put their death warrants on his flag. He sailed into battle advertising the fact that he had a personal vendetta against 2 colonial governors. And he won. Again and again and again. Calico Jack Rackham gets credit for designing what most people think of as the pirate flag. His version featured a skull above 2 crossed swords, not crossed bones. It's arguably the most recognizable pirate symbol in history, and it's the one that eventually became the default image in popular culture. But Calico Jack himself was, by pirate standards, fairly unremarkable. He's mostly famous for 2 things: his flag and the fact that 2 of his crew members, Anne Bonny and Mary Read, turned out to be among the most fearless pirates of their generation. When Rackham's ship was finally captured, most of the male crew were too drunk to fight. Bonny and Read were the only ones who actually resisted. There's an irony there. The man who designed the most iconic pirate flag in history was captured because he was blackout drunk when the Navy showed up. His flag was braver than he was, but the variations didn't stop with skulls and swords. Some pirate flags featured full skeletons toasting with a captain, a symbol that said, "We drink with death." Others showed an arm holding a cutlass, a simple and direct promise of violence. Some showed hourglasses with wings, a symbol borrowed from old gravestone carvings that meant time flies. Edward Lowe, a pirate whose cruelty was legendary even by pirate standards, flew a red skeleton on a black background. Red, in that context, meant exactly what it had always meant: no quarter, no mercy. If you see this flag, it's already too late. Lowe was known for torturing captains who tried to hide cargo or throw valuables overboard. He once cut off a merchant captain's lips, cooked them in front of him, and forced the man to eat them. His flag was a warning, and anyone who'd heard the stories knew that the warning was backed up by genuine, almost unimaginable brutality. Then there was Stede Bonnet, the so-called gentleman pirate, a wealthy plantation owner from Barbados who abandoned his comfortable life, bought a ship, hired a crew, and sailed off to become a pirate, with absolutely no experience on the water. His flag featured a skull above a horizontal long bone, with a dagger on one side and a heart on the other. It was almost elegant, which was fitting for a man who went pirating because he was bored with being rich. Bonnet was eventually captured and hanged, but his flag remains one of the more distinctive designs from the era. Henry Every, sometimes spelled Avery, flew a flag showing a skull in profile wearing a bandana above two crossed bones. Stop for a second. What you just heard about the pirate code is the part that rewrites everything you thought you knew. But it only lands when you see the actual shares, the exact fractions written into the Articles of Agreement, the punishments, the port records, the names of the men who funded them from government offices. It's all in the Black Flag Codex, linked in the description. 5 seconds. Grab it now, because what comes next builds directly on it. Link is below. QR code is on your screen. Every pulled off what many historians consider the most profitable pirate raid in history, capturing the Mughal ship Ganges Sawai in 1695 and making off with gold, silver, and jewels worth an estimated £600,000, a staggering fortune at the time. After the raid, Every vanished completely. He was never caught. Some historians believe he changed his name and lived out his days in obscurity somewhere in the British Isles. Others think he died penniless, swindled out of his treasure by merchants who knew he couldn't exactly take them to court. Now, here's where the story gets really interesting, because the Jolly Roger didn't just work as a weapon against merchant ships. It also worked as a communication tool between pirates themselves. See, when two pirate ships spotted each other at sea, there was a moment of tension. Are they friendly? Are they hostile? Are they going to try to take our cargo? In a world without radio, without identification systems, without any reliable way to tell friend from foe, the flag was everything. A ship flying a Jolly Roger was announcing itself as a pirate. But the specific design of that flag told other pirates exactly who they were dealing with. If you saw Blackbeard's skeleton and hourglass, you knew that was Blackbeard. If you saw Robert's two-skull flag, you knew that was Black Bart. The flags functioned like a pirate ID system, and because pirate crews frequently traded members, shared intelligence, and coordinated attacks, recognizing who was flying what flag could mean the difference between a profitable alliance and an unnecessary battle. There was also a protocol around the flag that rarely makes it into the movies. Pirates didn't always fly the Jolly Roger. In fact, they usually didn't. Most of the time, pirate ships flew false colors. They'd fly the flag of whatever nation they thought would be least suspicious. A British flag if they were near British shipping lanes. A French flag if they were near French territory. A Dutch flag. A Spanish flag. Whatever got them close enough to their target without raising alarm. The Jolly Roger only went up at the last moment, when the pirate ship was close enough that running was no longer an option. When the merchant captain could see the guns being run out and the crew assembling on deck, that's when the false colors came down and the black flag went up. It was the final punctuation mark on a carefully orchestrated ambush. And here's the genius of that timing. By the time the merchant ship saw the Jolly Roger, the psychological damage was already done. They'd been lured in by a friendly flag, they'd relaxed, maybe they'd even waved. And then, in the space of a few seconds, the entire reality of their situation changed. Friendly became hostile, safe became lethal, and that whiplash, that sudden shift from safety to terror, made the flag even more effective than it would have been if the pirates had flown it from the start. Some captains took this deception even further. They would disguise their ships entirely, paint over the gun ports, remove visible weapons from the deck, dress their crew in merchant clothing. They would come alongside their target, exchange greetings, maybe even begin a trading conversation. And then, at a signal, the disguises came off. Weapons appeared from below decks. The gun ports opened. The Jolly Roger flew up the mast, and by then, the merchant ship was so close that escape was physically impossible. This tactic was called the pirate's ruse, and it was devastatingly effective. Records from the early 1700s show that some merchant captains became so paranoid about the ruse that they would fire warning shots at any approaching vessel, regardless of what flag it was flying. which, of course, created its own problems. Because shooting at a legitimate trading partner or a Royal Navy vessel was an excellent way to get yourself hanged. But the Jolly Roger wasn't just about attacking merchant ships. It also played a role in one of the most important aspects of pirate life: recruitment. Piracy was, at its core, a labor-intensive business. You needed men to sail the ship, man the guns, board enemy vessels, and maintain equipment. And pirate crews had a terrifyingly high turnover rate: disease, injury, capture, execution, desertion. A crew that numbered 80 in January might be down to 40 by June. So pirates were always recruiting, and one of their most effective recruitment tools was the reputation that the Jolly Roger carried. When a pirate ship captured a merchant vessel, they would often offer the captured crew a choice: join us, or we'll set you adrift in a longboat with minimal supplies. For sailors who were already underpaid, overworked, and badly treated by their merchant captains, the pirate life had genuine appeal. Better food, a share of the loot, a democratic say in how the ship was run, and the promise of wealth that legitimate sailing could never provide. The Jolly Roger represented that promise. It said, yes, we're outlaws. Yes, we might die. But while we're alive, we're free. We answer to no king, no company, no captain who can flog us on a whim. We share the wealth equally. We vote on major decisions. We eat the same food, from the captain down to the newest recruit. And it worked. Historical records show that a significant percentage of pirate crews were made up of men who had voluntarily joined after being captured. They saw the flag, they heard the pitch, and they chose piracy over a lifetime of back-breaking labor for poverty wages. Now, the navies of the world were not stupid. They understood exactly what the Jolly Roger was doing, and they hated it. Not just because pirates were stealing cargo, although that was obviously a problem, but because the flag itself was an act of rebellion. It was a symbol that said, the rules don't apply to us. We operate outside your system. We reject your authority. For colonial governments that relied on controlling the sea to maintain their empires, this was an existential threat. If enough sailors started believing that the pirate life was better than legitimate service, the entire merchant marine system would collapse. And without merchant shipping, there were no colonies. Without colonies, there was no empire. The Jolly Roger wasn't just a flag, it was a challenge to the entire economic order of the Western world. So, the response was brutal. The British, Spanish, French, and Dutch governments all invested heavily in anti-piracy operations. They sent warships to patrol the Caribbean, the African coast, and the Indian Ocean. They offered pardons to pirates who surrendered willingly, trying to drain the pirate ranks through amnesty. And when they caught pirates, they made examples of them. The execution of pirates was deliberately theatrical. Public hangings at the waterfront, where the bodies were left in gibbets, iron cages, to rot in full view of every sailor entering or leaving port. The message was clear. This is what happens when you fly that flag. This is where the Jolly Roger leads. At Execution Dock in London, pirates were hanged at low tide, and their bodies were left until 3 tides had washed over them. Then, the most notorious among them would be tarred, wrapped in chains, and hung in gibbets at the mouth of the Thames, where every ship entering or leaving the busiest port in the world would pass within yards of their decomposing remains. Captain William Kidd's body hung in a gibbet at Tilbury Point for over 20 years. 20 years of sailors looking up at those bones and chains and thinking about what choices led that man to that cage. That was the counter-message. The anti-Jolly Roger. Fly that flag, and this is your future. But here's what the governments didn't understand, or maybe they understood but couldn't admit. The gibbets and the hangings didn't work. Not really. Because the Jolly Roger was never just about greed or violence. It was about something deeper. It was about a group of men, and some women, who looked at the world they'd been given and said no. No to the rigid class system that kept them poor. No to the brutal working conditions aboard merchant and naval vessels. No to the idea that some men were born to rule and others were born to serve. The pirate ship was, in many ways, the most democratic institution in the Western world during the early 1700s. Pirate crews elected their captains. They voted on where to sail, who to attack, and how to divide the loot. They had written articles, essentially constitutions, that guaranteed every crew member rights and protections. If a pirate was injured in battle, he received compensation from the ship's fund. A lost limb was worth a set payment. A lost eye, another payment. These compensation schedules were agreed upon before the ship even left port, written into the articles that every crew member signed. Captains who abused their authority could be voted out and replaced. The quartermaster, elected separately, served as a check on the captain's power, handling food distribution, settling disputes, and managing discipline. This was not anarchy. This was organized self-governance, created by men who had experienced the alternative and rejected it completely. In some crews, black, indigenous, and mixed-race sailors served alongside white European sailors with something approaching equality, at a time when much of the Atlantic world was building its economy on the enslavement of African people. Black Sam Bellamy's crew, for example, included men of African, Native American, and European descent, all sharing in the plunder on the same terms. This wasn't universal across all pirate ships, and it would be naive to romanticize it completely. But compared to the Merchant Marine or the Royal Navy, where non-white sailors were routinely paid less and treated worse, pirate ships were remarkably egalitarian. The Jolly Roger represented all of that. Freedom from hierarchy, freedom from exploitation, freedom from the crushing machinery of colonial capitalism that ground ordinary sailors into dust. And that's why no amount of hangings could kill it. Because you can't execute an idea. The golden age of piracy eventually ended, not because the navies of the world defeated it militarily, but because the conditions that created it gradually changed. The end of the War of Spanish Succession in 1713 had thrown thousands of trained sailors out of work, and many of them had turned to piracy as the only viable alternative. As new wars broke out and the navies began hiring again, the supply of desperate, unemployed sailors dried up. Pardons picked off the less committed pirates, and increased naval patrols made piracy more dangerous and less profitable. By the 1730s, the Golden Age was over. The last of the great pirate captains were dead, captured, or retired. The Caribbean was pacified. The trade routes were secure again. But the flag survived. And this is perhaps the most remarkable part of the entire story. The Jolly Roger, a symbol that was used for roughly 20 to 30 years during the early 1700s, became the single most enduring icon of piracy. It outlived every pirate who ever flew it. It outlived the colonial empires that tried to destroy it. It outlived the entire economic system that created the conditions for its existence. Today, the skull and crossbones appears on everything from children's clothing to military insignia to corporate branding. The United States Submarine Service adopted a version of the Jolly Roger during World War II, flying it from their conning towers after successful missions. British submarines did the same, a tradition that started when Admiral Sir Arthur Wilson called submarine warfare underhand, unfair, and damned un-English, essentially calling it piracy, and the submariners adopted the insult as a badge of honor. Commander Max Horton raised the first submarine, Jolly Roger, in 1914, and the tradition continued through both World Wars, with new symbols added to the flag for each kill, each special operation, each enemy vessel sent to the bottom. Special Forces units around the world use skull and crossbones imagery to this day. Sports teams, motorcycle clubs, punk bands, skateboard companies, fashion brands put it on handbags and sell them for $1,000. The flag that was designed to terrify merchant sailors in the Caribbean 300 years ago is now the most recognized symbol of rebellion in human history. More recognized than the raised fist. More recognized than the anarchy symbol. More recognized than any political flag or revolutionary banner ever created. And that's because the Jolly Roger taps into something universal, something that goes beyond piracy, beyond history, beyond any specific time or place. It represents the idea that the rules are not sacred, that authority can be challenged, that ordinary people, when pushed far enough, will build their own systems, their own codes, their own flags, and sail under them into the unknown. 300 years later, we're still sailing under that flag. Maybe not literally, but every time someone looks at a system that grinds people down and says, "No, I reject this," they're flying the Jolly Roger in spirit. A man named Edward Teach tied slow-burning fuses into his beard and lit them on fire before battle, wreathing his face in smoke like a demon rising from hell. He did it because fear was worth more than gunpowder. A man named Bartholomew Roberts captured 400 ships and put his enemies' skulls on his flag because he wanted them to know he was coming and there was nothing they could do about it. A man named Jack Rackham designed a flag so iconic that it still appears on flags, tattoos, and t-shirts 3 centuries later, even though the man himself was captured dead drunk. They're all gone now. The ships have rotted, the gold was spent, the bones are dust, but the flag is still here. And somewhere out there, right now, someone is looking at a black flag with a white skull on it and feeling something they can't quite explain. Something that goes beyond decoration or fashion or irony. Something that feels, even after all these centuries, like freedom.